Everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I am Jeremy Birmingham. That is Andrew Ellis. This is Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast. And today is Thursday. That means there's 2 days before the Ohio State spring football game, which means that the Buckeyes are going to have a lot of big-time players coming to town to watch a practice in front of a lot of people in the stadium. Andrew, you won't be there because you don't actually like sports. But if you were a member of the fan base going to this game on Saturday, let's just, before we dive into the recruiting stuff, what would you be looking forward to seeing?
Well, as of about 12 hours ago, I would have said the quarterback, both quarterbacks. That's not going to happen. So I am going to say two freshmen, Carnell Tate and Jelani Thurman. I think those have been two of the more fascinating guys this spring per all of your reports, and Bill and Austin and all you great folks. So that's kind of what I'm going to be watching for, is those two youngsters on offense.
Yeah, they're going to get a lot of shots. They're thrown their way. So I imagine that those guys will have an opportunity to make some plays. And I think it's a good idea for Ohio State to try and feature as many freshmen as possible in spring game scenarios, because there are going to be, as I said, a lot of recruits visiting. And, you want to see that opportunity before you as you try to visualize it for yourself if you're a recruit. And before we start to really dive into the recruit visitor list for this weekend, and we're not going to go player by player or anything like that because it's just going to be sort of fool's errand. But let's backtrack to Tuesday night. The commitment of Peyton Pierce. Obviously, we had the interview on Bermanology, and I felt pretty good about where things were going in the Peyton Pierce recruitment after he was on the first episode of Bermanology about 3 weeks ago, leading into his visit. And I remember telling you after I, was done talking to him that night that I was going to be pretty shocked if he ended up going somewhere else. But the timeline of it, Andrew, is such that the kid obviously wanted to be like true to his word and say he was going to finish out these other visits, but he knew where he wanted to be. And for James Laurinaitis for Ohio State, it's a big commitment, not just because he's a 4-star linebacker from Texas, blah, 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 but the Buckeyes had 9 commitments before Peyton committed, and 8 of them were offensive players. And now you have 10 commitments and 2 defensive players, but that rate, that's, feels a little bit better for Garrett Stover to have somebody to work with on the defensive side of the ball. And I think it changes now the next wave that we should expect to see from Ohio State on the recruiting trail, and most of that should be defensive commitments, from here to basically commitment 17 or 18, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and I think it was on one of the daily podcasts, you and Bill were talking about how the offense is, could essentially be almost done right now. So getting that second big piece on defense, big win for James Laurinaitis. And I know you had, told me as recently as a few weeks back that you felt pretty good about the Peyton Pierce recruitment. And I had all these lingering fears about Oklahoma due to some of the family ties there. And also I don't like sports. So what do I know anyway?
True.
But that's true. But big win, great player, obviously one of the top targets at the position. And it seems like this could hopefully, open the floodgates a little bit for the defensive side of the ball moving forward.
It's wild. Ohio State has not had a linebacker commitment from outside of Ohio in 3 classes, which is hard to believe. But it's also indicative of the fact that the linebacker position is one that Ohio State is recruiting a little bit differently now than it used to. But in this class, I think there's an outside chance that the Buckeyes could try to take 4 linebackers in 2024, if possible. Kingston Vialamuasa from Bellflower, California, St. John Bosco is right near the top of that list. Sammy Brown, obviously, they're still chasing him, the 5-star from Georgia. I think the Buckeyes are probably running 3rd there behind Clemson and Georgia, but he's still saying he wants to come visit. Obviously, Edwin Spillman down in Tennessee, who dropped a top 6 schools list this week. But from what I understand from talking to people, a lot of people think that might be just really 2 teams at the top of that list. And that's Ohio State and Tennessee. So there's an opportunity for James Laurinaitis and Jim Knowles to really make some hay in this class. And I say Jim Knowles because it's important for those who didn't watch the Peyton Pierce commitment interview of Bermanology. Like, he was pretty adamant that the Jim Knowles impact was real in his recruitment. I know James Laurinaitis gets a lot of credit for that commitment and should, but Jim Knowles played a large role in it. And I think it goes to show that these two guys can sort of work as a two-headed dragon a little bit when it comes to James doing a lot of the day-to-day lifting on the relationship side. And then when you get a chance to sit down and be with Jim Knowles on campus or where he comes to visit players in their high schools, Jim Knowles' football acumen and the way that he handles the game is pretty impressive. And it's easy for kids to see that. And I don't think people should underestimate Jim Knowles' impact in this recruitment.
Yeah, I'm with you. And speaking of that Bermanology episode with Peyton Pierce, I would encourage anybody to watch that. I mean, really well-spoken kid. Some of the things he said about his close friend who's, I think he said he's battling leukemia or something like that. Just a really solid episode. So definitely watch that if you haven't. But yeah, when Jim Knowles first arrived, I think we talked a lot about him being kind of the defensive mastermind more so than the recruiting guy. I think, and Peyton said it in the interview, just having Jim Knowles there was very big. But having someone like Jim Knowles and then that young kind of go out and get him, almost like a Brian Hartline type, even though he's only in a GA role right now, in James Laurinaitis, I do think that's going to be could be a dynamic duo moving forward. And like you said, it's a big class for linebackers right now. So
yeah, and I know people are desperate or kind of anxious, I guess maybe the more proper word, to see Laurinaitis out on the recruiting trail and have him go out and visit schools. I'm not sure that really ultimately matters that much. I know that maybe just from a perception standpoint, it does provide some impact. But the reality is he's the guy talking to these recruits most of the time as it is. He's dealing with them a lot when they're on campus, and he can do anything Jim Knowles can do when they're on campus. So I don't know that there is a real desperate need for Ohio State to send James Laurinaitis out into the world and show up at high schools wearing an Ohio State jacket. I know that it's cool if you have, a college football Hall of Famer walking around your high school talking to your football players, but I don't know that it is as impactful on being on the road as people seem to be clamoring for, but that's neither here nor there. The reality is, though, James Laurinaitis, that the Brian Hartline comparison is apt for a number of reasons. Aside from the fact that I think they were in the same recruiting class at Ohio State, the reality is they both played for the Buckeyes. They both understand more than most coaches what it means to suit up for the Scarlet and Gray and all of that, which that entails. They're young. They're very relatable. I've mentioned this before, but what makes James Laurinaitis really unique to me is how, for a guy who has all of the accolades that he's accumulated from his football career, he's extremely humble and just a very normal human being. And that connects with kids in a way that I don't think people really understand. Like, he's extremely easy to get along with. And, the impact he made on Peyton Pierce, who was basically going to pick Notre Dame, I think, back in January because of James Laurinaitis, and to see the way that switched that quickly when Ohio State was admittedly one of the last schools to get into offer, like that's very telling as to the impact that he has.
Yeah, and I think just, he's a bit of a younger guy, and he's a guy that some of these kids who are 17, 18, 19 probably remember hearing his name just, in the NFL. So that certainly doesn't hurt.
Yeah, and the question now is how does the addition of Peyton Pierce, the compliment to Garrett Stover, does this kickstart that next defensive run of commitments that Ohio State is looking for? Because as you mentioned, and as we talked about on Monday, like, the offensive recruiting is pretty much, I don't want to say it's done, because it's not. You obviously are still waiting on a commitment from Demarion Witten at tight end. The Buckeyes would like to take 2 in this class. I think there's some real traction for Max LeBlanc, the 4-star from Nashville. From Tennessee, from Chattanooga, who comes by way of Canada. I think there's some real momentum for him to be in this class. And then there's the question mark about, do they add another running back outside of Sam Williams-Dixon, who's an athlete and could play in the slot or play wide receiver or play running back, maybe some defense if he wanted to. Like, how do you everything else on offense, aside from the push that Justin Fry has to make on the offensive line with like Brandon Baker or Gerby Lambert, guys like that, everything else on offense feels kind of like gravy at this point, and defense certainly needs some meat.
Yeah, no, it
Give me
definitely
the
does.
meat.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about the meat, that's the defensive line, and we sound like a broken record saying this all the time. Larry Johnson's recruiting board is just kind of hard to piece together. I know there's a couple of big names coming in this weekend. I think Booker Pickett's probably one of the biggest names on the list. And then outside of the defensive line, it's just mostly I'm watching those in-state corners, and then you got a couple other corners around the country. In California and Texas, and then Charles Lester in Florida, guys like that. But yeah, defensive line and secondary, I think, is really going to be what we're going to be watching for the next few weeks, few months. And yeah.
What's crazy about the secondary specifically right now is I don't want to say you can put Aaron Scott and Bryce West in the class in ink. I think they are both. It will be an upset to me if either one of those guys goes elsewhere. But Tim Walton did get a lot of flack in the last year from folks, and I'm not entirely sure why. And I know the on-field production was a little bit underwhelming a year ago when you're dealing with a lot of injuries and a very depleted depth chart. But what you're seeing right now at corner, I mean, if you think Bryce West and Aaron Scott are in the class by the time that it's time to sign, and I think they are, and then you can have the opportunity to recruit guys like Xavier Brown and Charles Lester and Miles Lockhart. I mean, three, big time guys from California, Florida, and Arizona, respectively. And then you have Corey and Gibson at corner, or I'm sorry, at safety from Texas, who Perry Eliano is very involved in. Peyton Woodyard, who was at Ohio State on Wednesday visiting the Georgia commit, 5-star commit. You just never know what can happen out there if you keep swinging. But there is an opportunity for Ohio State in the secondary to really make some hay. I've used that, phrase now twice in this episode already, which is weird. I don't really generally say make some hay, but I guess today I'm just thinking about hay for some reason. There is a lot of positive momentum happening on the defensive side of the ball in the recruiting efforts. It's just not yielded commitments yet. But again, because of this push that Ohio State's on, this crazy rush of momentum they have, you do wonder if that maybe gets a guy or two to jump in the boat. That starts this weekend. I think Reggie Powers from Centerville, Ohio. He's been offered by Ohio State 3 weeks ago now. And I think a lot of people anticipated that he would have already been in the class, but that hasn't happened yet. I would not be shocked if that happens when he visits this weekend, when he comes back for the spring game. A player that I'm kind of looking at this weekend to see if Ohio State really goes aggressively after is defensive tackle Jaden Jackson from the IMG Academy. He's originally from Indiana. He camped at Ohio State when he was a freshman in high school before he went down to IMG and was really impressive. Larry Johnson was visibly impressed by what he saw of Jaden Jackson at that camp in 2021. So that's a player that Ohio State has offered, but he hasn't been back to campus since. And I think that this is an opportunity to see if you can really get a push there at defensive tackle. And then you have the real question marks, as you mentioned, Booker Pickett coming in from Florida. He's the nephew of former Ohio State defensive tackle Ryan Pickett. That 20 some years ago, and Ryan Pickett played at Ohio State, so it's not a huge deal, but it does still help to have some family ties there. Ohio State is extremely high on Booker Pickett, and I know he's high on the Buckeyes as well. I wouldn't expect like a commitment or anything to pop up from him after this weekend, but the opportunity to get him back on campus and really push the ball down the field in that recruitment is huge for Ohio State because he's a difference maker. He could be a defensive end. He's 6'5", 200 pounds right now. He could be a stand-up player at the Jack or something like that too. So he does have some versatility that Ohio State loves, and those are two Florida guys that I'm really looking at this weekend. I'm like, that let's see if the dial gets turned up there.
Right. And real quick with the two in-state corners, I think Bryce West is not making it to campus this week because of like a track meet or something, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's correct.
So
Bryce has track, so he will not be at spring.
So let me just ask you this. Typically when we think of those Glenville recruitments, we think of Ted Ginn Sr. likes to bring attention to other guys, and they kind of drag things out a while. So for the longest time, I was under the impression that, Aaron Scott would be in the class before Bryce West. I'm starting to wonder if maybe Bryce West could potentially beat him to the punch. And I just wanted to pick your brain on
I
that.
could see it happening. I do, it's long been known that Ted Ginn Sr. prefers to have his players wait until later in the process because it helps bring other attention to other players in the program. While I understand that approach, I also think that approach is very 2006 because it's not the same world anymore.
Right.
And the kids that are being recruited heavily are completely overwhelmed by the process now, whereas 15, 20 years ago, they weren't because they weren't completely inundated with it like they are all the time now. I think that maybe you see these kids growing tired of the entire process. Number two, social media makes it so that these coaches are constantly in touch. Number three, it's not like college football coaches around the country or around the Midwest are going to stop calling Cleveland Glenville because Bryce West is committed somewhere. They know they need to maintain that relationship, and they know there's other players there, and so they're going to keep doing their job there anyway. So I understand the logic and the old school mentality that Ted Ginn Sr. has with that, but I don't think ultimately that it's the same game that it was when that approach really was being refined. So I think you could see a decision from Bryce before maybe the summer. I mean, which would still be 5 months ahead of where we thought it was going to be. But I don't think anyone right now, the kids that have been recruited like Bryce West have for the last 2 years, very hard by a lot of teams. Like there's only so much of this you can really need or take. And I think that that's playing a role.
Right. Do you remember when
That's
it was
that
Arvell Reese committed? Because I think that one happened sooner than we maybe thought it was.
I'm sorry, what?
Isn't that
you
when Arvell Reese committed last cycle?
Yeah, that was in August. That was Ohio State was in a spot where they had really been lacking momentum, and I think that the Buckeyes basically, I don't know this for a fact, but I get the vibe that they essentially called Ted Ginn Sr. and said, "Hey, we need him to do this now because we need some juice." That was right after like Tackett Curtis committed to USC and sort of caused some concern. So I think that was ultimately what that was about. So there's room though. I mean, for Bryce West to make some moves here, but it's not just him. I mean, if you look at the rest of the defensive line, you know that we're going to go into at least June for Dylan Stewart, the 5-star out of Maryland. I'm interested to see if maybe, this is me totally speculating, there's a handful of guys coming back to campus from Maryland, from Baltimore this weekend who were there on the April 1st weekend. I'm wondering if Dylan decides to just, do that as well because he came with that big group on the first. I don't think it'll happen, but you never know if he wants to come back and get a second look because he went straight from Ohio State to Georgia. And now it sort of seems like those two teams, along with Alabama, are the three that are most in the mix for him. So, there's a lot of guys that are going to be on campus that are not really being talked about yet because we just don't know everyone because not everyone puts their travel plans on social media or, believe it or not, folks, the Ohio State coaches are not, reaching out and saying, by the way, this player is visiting this weekend. So that just doesn't happen. I wish it did, though.
Yeah, me too. We talked about Dylan Stewart a little bit last week, I think.
Yeah.
Am I wrong to starting to get the warm and fuzzies a little bit with that one? I just saw his official visit schedule. I think it's Georgia, Ohio State, South Carolina. Obviously, that's only 3 of them.
Yeah, Alabama will find its way on there.
Yeah, I don't really care about South Carolina, and I guess I just saw that Ohio State was after Georgia, and that kind of made me feel good. It probably means nothing. I don't know. I'm probably just being an optimist. You know how much of an optimist I am.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think if you're looking for a positive, it's that he is penciled in on that June 16th weekend at Ohio State, which is shaping up to be like the biggest one, where I believe most of the commitments will be in town. That seems to be like the A-list weekend for Ohio State. And I think that it's important that he's there for that because he needs, you've seen like Jeremiah Smith on Twitter and on social media the last couple of days, like, hey, we need you, Dylan. We these guys are trying to grow those relationships. And Any opportunity to be face to face in those key weekends is going to be pretty valuable for Ohio State.
That makes sense.
Pretty valuable. Kamarion Franklin, 5-star defensive end from Mississippi, is supposed to visit this weekend. At least that was what the plan was like 3 weeks ago. I have not been able to confirm if that's still on or not. That's another one where you just kind of take a swing and see what happens if you're Ohio State. It's not a relationship that you hear much about. He's not a talker. But, anytime you can get 5 stars on campus, then you should. That's real smart thinking. Who else are you looking at? David Sanders, 5-star in the class of 2025, offensive tackle from North Carolina. He's supposed to be in town. He's had like 3 other planned trips to Ohio State that didn't get made. So I guess I'm sort of from Missouri on that one. Show me and then we'll believe it. But the biggest visitor to me this weekend that it feels like it's not an important trip, really shouldn't be, is Julian Lewis, the 2026 quarterback from Carrollton, Georgia, who, he's a 2026. He just finished his freshman year. But this kid is a very polished Bryce Young type of prospect. I imagine he'll get a little bit taller than Bryce. And if that's the case, Ohio State is so good at recruiting quarterbacks, and it's so important to get kids in town early in their development to really set the tone for that relationship. And it's a big weekend for Ohio State, I think, with Julian Lewis, because that kid is almost a surefire bet to be the number 1 ranked player in the class of 2026 if he continues on the path he's on. So having him in town for 2 days is pretty important.
Yeah, a lot of times these events seem to be just as important for those guys that are a few classes down the road. And I admittedly haven't done my homework on the 25 and 26 guys near as much as the 24 group. I think Ryan Montgomery is supposed to be back on campus again. Yep. I know he's been doing a world tour of late. It seems like he's been about everywhere. And I know Luke did the same thing back before he committed too. So, no problem with that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, though, because the 2025 quarterback discussion for Ohio State really hadn't been needed because they were still chasing their 2024 quarterback choice. Now, with Aaron Nolan's commitment done and in the books last Saturday, Ohio State can start to really begin evaluating that 2025 class more than they have been. I think they've purposefully been a little bit slower on that class because there are a handful of pretty positive options in Ohio with Ryan Montgomery, Tavian St. Clair, and now Jamison Kitna down at Lakota East. That's John Kitna's son. John Kitna is now the head coach at Lakota East. So you got 3 pretty good, high level Division I players in the state of Ohio at quarterback, which has been, it's been a while since there's been, multiple or even really one at the quarterback. I mean, you got Drew Aller in the class of 2022, but other than that, it's been slim pickings at quarterback. So it will be fascinating to me to see what goes on from here to end of June with those quarterbacks in the class of 25, because Ryan Montgomery obviously you'd expect to be the front runner. Ohio State has offered him, but obviously those offers are not official until their senior season. So anything can happen. But when you consider the fact that his brother Luke is on the team, consider all the other things, there's a lot of reason to think that Ohio State would like for him to be that guy. But Ryan still has some development to go to get to that point where I think you can comfortably say, hey, you're our quarterback and we'll move forward. But he's also not in a hurry, so it works out fine for both sides.
Yeah, we don't want to find ourselves in another Danny Clark situation, I don't think. So try to avoid something like that at all costs, I'd say.
That one turned out bizarre. Have you ever thought to really how different Ohio State's quarterback recruiting is now than it was 10 years ago? It is night and day. That's pun intended, I guess.
I get it.
It's quite crazy to see how far the quarterback recruiting has been elevated over the last few years. And I'm not going to be shocked when Aaron Nolan becomes a top 3 ranked quarterback in this class across all major networks by the end of his senior season, because he's pretty special what he does on film. Now, there is some talk, Andrew. We're talking about, Jeremiah Smith coming to town and how important that is. But there's at least talk that JoJo Trader will come with him this weekend from South Florida, his teammate down there at Chaminade Madonna High School in Hollywood. That'd be pretty important, I think, because Ohio State has two wide receivers committed. If JoJo Trader decided, hey, I'm going to just end this now, which is not what I expect at all, because I've said all along that I think he'll be like a November, December decision. But you never know with the Jeremiah McClellan offer and interest. But he only, he released a top 12 2 weeks ago. So maybe he's not close to shutting it down. Ohio State did offer another wide receiver, Keelan Adams from Virginia. He's a player that Brian Hartline's pretty high on, from what I understand. And, those guys are both slot type wide receivers, Jeremiah McClellan and Keelan Adams. But if JoJo Trader wants to be the slot receiver and is willing to come up and visit, I think you have to go like as hard as you can after him this weekend to say, hey, this is your spot if you want it. Otherwise, you may end up needing to be the fourth receiver in the class, and we can't guarantee what's going to happen in November or December. But if you can, get that opportunity now, that is a major opportunity for Brian Hartline.
Yeah. And just the fact that he even shows up, that's going to be massive. And I know there's going to be people that say another receiver, whatever, but this is a kid that's going to have a spot available for him, whether it's Saturday or Sunday, or whether it's during the early signing period, or even in February on National Signing Day. He's that good. I saw Brian Hartline was Instagramming some highlights of his the other day, which kind of got me thinking, I wonder if there's a chance he might show up this weekend. And then some news kind of leaked out today that might in fact be happening. I know the Miami Hurricanes fans on Twitter seem to be doing everything in their power to push him away from Coral Gables. So props to them for that. But yeah, if he comes this weekend, I think, and if you're Brian Hartline, you're going to put the full court press on him. And I have full faith. Brian Hartline can, work magic for all I know. So nothing will surprise me this weekend if he is on campus.
Right. Especially because he's going to be there with Jeremiah, and Jeremiah Smith has become an absolute crazy peer-to-peer recruiter in the last couple of weeks, which, I think is one of those things for Ohio State that you just have to, file that under things they love, because if the best player in the country is being that aggressive and that vocal, it changes things a little bit. It changes the tenor of how everyone else in the class are being viewed. So, what else? What else you got? What are you thinking? I assume we'll see Mark Nave, Ian Moore, both Armstrongs. All those guys will be on campus. Of course, Garrett Stover will be on campus for the spring game. I would imagine with Jeremiah Smith coming up, I think pretty much every commit other than the two recent Aaron Noland, Peyton Pierce, and James Peoples will not be on campus. The other 7, I think, will be. So it's going to be a fun weekend. Weather's going to be beautiful, 75 degrees or a little bit warmer. Sunny, $7 to get in. It's too bad you don't like sports, because you'd probably have a good time.
Yeah, I'm going to be dusting off the old Dungeons and Dragons game and playing that with some of my old cronies. So that's what I'll be doing.
Hellfire Club for the win.
Hell yeah. DeJuan Williams, is he supposed to be there still? Running back Maryland. Yep. I'm kind of intrigued by that one a little bit. Okay.
Yeah, the running back situation is fascinating. Let's call it what it is. Sam Williams-Dixon will be on campus this weekend, and it's if you're following Instagram, he put out a post on Tuesday or Wednesday, basically a countdown to Saturday, and had 3 pictures of him at Penn State, Kentucky, and Ohio State, and it said a countdown, and it said home. So I think he's committing probably this weekend. If you are, or I don't think he's going to release another top 3. So, the reality is Ohio State has options at running back. And I think Chauncey Bowens, the Florida commitment, who was supposed to visit last week on the 7th, did not visit because he had a track meet that came up that ended up canceling his trip. You still have Jordan Lyle down at St. Thomas Aquinas, who the Buckeyes are pretty high on. And then you got DeJuan Williams. I think you're going to find another potential running back to join alongside James Peoples, and then wherever you have Sam Williams-Dixon. So ideally, I think for Tony Alford, all of this would lead to the summer and kind of have everyone visit one more time, and let's put them all on the camp field together and see who, dominates the experience. So, but DeJuan Williams is certainly one to watch. If we were playing like an over-under game on the weekend and how many commits, and then, you're looking for like a guy that you could see going either way, he's in that discussion.
Speaking of, do you want to play an over-under game?
Sure, why not?
Okay, I was going to set it at 2.5 between like now and let's say Monday or Tuesday, I guess.
Over. I don't know. I'm saying that confidently, but I'm not confident about it. I feel pretty good. Like if the over under was 1.5, I'd take the over all day and I'd be thrilled and I'd feel like, I was going to win a lot of moolah, but you're going to need a surprise probably to happen this weekend to get to that 3. But I think that will happen. I just feel like the momentum Ohio State has right now, the confidence that they're operating with on the recruiting trail. You heard Ryan Day talking about it on his Wednesday press conference. Like, they know that right now they're cooking with gas, and they're going to put the pressure on some kids. I think not in a way that's overtly like, hey, do it, but like, hey, you got to get on this train right now, or there may not be any seats left.
Yeah, and I like that they're I like that they're recruiting Sam Williams-Dixon as kind of an athlete. All I know is that when he faced my St. Mary's Memorial Rough Riders in the playoffs, he like absolutely annihilated them as a running back. But if you can bring in two pure backs and then somebody like him as a Curtis Samuel or whatever you want to call it, I think that'd be the optimal plan for Tony Alford, kind of like you said. But who's the main competition for DeJuan Williams? Is it Michigan's involved there, aren't they? I think it's Michigan.
Michigan's involved. Maybe. I mean, obviously Maryland, Penn State. I mean, I don't know how many more running backs Penn State can take, but I also admittedly have not paid that close attention to their recruiting class. Michigan is involved. One running back I didn't bring up is that Taylor Tatum from Texas, who is not visiting this weekend, but from what I understand, may be coming the weekend after to Ohio State. That would be his first visit. If that happens, like, that's one to also pay pretty close attention to. That's a Michigan lean at this point, but Ohio State is certainly willing to, push the envelope there. So I don't think there's any hurry to wrap that up. And again, because right now, as I said, most of the stuff that happens on offense from here is gravy. I think you just make sure you're finding the right fit as opposed to scrambling, and you don't want to have to like go into December or November and change things up and say, oh, this guy didn't live up to what we thought he was going to be. He didn't, he didn't develop the way he seemed like he should or anything like that. So I think you'll be seeing Ohio State put the brakes on just a little bit on offense moving forward. So.
Gotcha. Two real quick things with defensive line. So Peyton Pierce was talking about Nigel Smith from down in Texas and about how he's going to recruit him and everything. And then you've also got Edric Houston down in Buford, Georgia, I want to say.
Yeah.
I guess, do we realistically see, I know it's early, Larry Johnson getting one of those guys? I think you were leaning more towards the Houston thing last time you wrote about it, maybe, but
which is weird because Nigel Smith has visited Ohio State like 5 times. But it just seems like that is trending. And like, I know he actually is really high on Penn State. But everyone that I've talked to in the Texas neck of the woods seems to indicate he wants to stay closer to home. And Oklahoma is in that mix. Texas is in that mix. Texas A&M, et cetera. But he's visited Ohio State a lot, and it's weird to me that it seems like the Buckeyes have fallen off in that recruitment, considering how much time he spent on campus with the Buckeyes. Edric Houston is a player that for some reason I just keep coming back to in this class. And when I did my class projection, like my most recent, guess the class back in January, or maybe early February, Edric Houston was one of the defensive linemen I had in the class, and he's pretty quiet. He's not a kid that wants to go out and bang the drums a lot and make it all about him. But the fact that he came up a week ago with his aunt just to spend the day at Ohio State is telling to me. That, he did it on Easter weekend. He's already had planned to come in the summer for an official visit, so it wasn't like they needed that to happen to get the official. I know people are, going to look at it and say, here's a kid from Georgia, 5-star defensive end. He's a 6'3", 260 pound, 6'4", 260 pound guy. He's not your traditional speed rusher that Georgia loves. Georgia likes him quite a bit from what I understand. They're recruiting him very hard, but I don't know. I think maybe he's a 3-tech at Georgia down the road, and I don't know if that's what he wants to do or not. That's just me speculating, but Ohio State is very much in that battle, like very much in that fight. So you just hope that you can get him to be willing to leave the South. And he says he is. That's what he told me when, the update we wrote about him at ohiostate.rivals.com on Saturday after his visit. And then you like the fact that he's teammates with KJ Bolden as well, because those two are certainly willing to explore options outside of Georgia. And for all of the hand wringing about recruiting in the South, kids at Buford have shown over and over that they have a willingness to, break the mold a little bit more so than some of the other kids in that area. So doesn't hurt that you have Aaron Nolan committed now from Georgia and helping recruit in the state as well. So long story short, yes, Ohio State has a real shot at Edric Houston. I would say that it's a less of a shot at Nigel Smith, but if you can get him back on campus again, now that you have that pull from Peyton Pierce, who Peyton said he considers him one of his close friends. Like, it's not just like, hey, this guy's in Texas, we know each other. Like, he says, they're pretty close. So he says he talks to him all the time. We'll see if that makes an impact. One thing we know is that Peyton is not going to be shy about like talking to him and trying to glow up the Buckeyes. So that's it.
Cool.
What else you got? Anything else before we kick this Popsy in?
One in or out? Just do one today.
Sure.
JoJo Trader.
Funny. I mean, out, but I'm just saying that things can get weird. Like, I don't think Miami's the competition for JoJo right now. I'm pretty sure it's Florida State that it may have the inside track in his recruitment. But if he shows up this weekend and there's no other like real dudes that Brian Hartline's going to be spending his time recruiting this weekend, and it's just Jeremiah Smith and Brian Hartline full court pressing JoJo Trader, why not? I mean, if he wants to break the internet, that's what he's tweeted the other day. Like, if you want to make number one, that's the way to do it. So I don't think that will happen. I think he wants to take things a little slower, but the opportunity's there, and he could shut down Ohio State's wide receiver recruiting with one tweet if he decided to do it. So it'll be interesting to see how valuable that is to him.
And they are 100% recruiting him as a wide receiver, correct? I know we talked about possibly corner in the past, but okay, I thought so.
I think he would be a great corner, but he wants to play receiver, and that's what Ohio State's recruiting. Me personally, I see him and think he could be a 5-star cornerback. It's like Ted Ginn Jr. Ted was, the number 1 ranked corner in the country when he was a high school senior, but everyone knew he was going to play receiver. So
I've heard of him.
Yes, I'm sure you have. Have you heard of ohiostate.rivals.com? And have you heard of promo code DTE30, which allows people who sign up to get a free month of their subscription? Because if you have heard of those things, you should go to ohiostate.rivals.com, put in the promo code DTE30, and join us on the Horseshoe Lounge, where we talk about Ohio State recruiting throughout the day, all day, every day. And then occasionally you'll find myself and Andrew Ellis here on Talking Stuff, the Ohio State recruiting podcast on the podcast. So thanks for watching, folks. Enjoy the spring game weekend. Get out and visit. Go see the game if you can, if you're in town. It should be a beautiful day and a great way to see some Buckeye football. So thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.